Welcome everyone to the Forum featuring candidates for the Kansas House of Representatives for the 29th District. I'm Reagan Cusmanio, and I am a member of the Public Policy and Advocacy Council here at the Overland Park Chamber of Commerce. I would like to say thank you to the audience members for coming today, and also thank you to those of you who are online today with us for joining and learning more about our candidates. I would also like to thank the Public Policy Council, which is a collaborative effort of the 10 chambers of commerce that represent more than 5,000 Johnson County businesses. In addition to hosting forums such as this, the Public Policy Council conducts other voter education efforts, including publishing a wealth of candidate information on the council's website, which is www.votejoco.com. I'd like to take a couple minutes to welcome Heather Meyer, and we are going to do 2 minutes each for an opening statement, and then we will start with questions, which you will have 2 minutes each to answer. And then at the end, we will do a closing statement with 1 minute each for your closing statement. So Heather, we'll start with you for the opening remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Representative Heather Meyer, and I currently serve the people of House District 29. I was elected by our district's Democratic Precinct Committee people last September to replace former Representative Brett Parker in the Kansas House. And I quickly got to work with constituent services, making sure that everyone in the community had access to COVID resources, help with unemployment, and many other issues and concerns that they had. I'm also a medical social worker and a mother of 2 children who have been students in SMSD since kindergarten. And I've also been a longtime volunteer in our schools, an advocate, and I have served as a community volunteer with many other organizations in the area. I truly look forward to answering everyone's questions today. Thank you for hosting this forum for us. I deeply appreciate it, and I hope to share my ideas and positions and help you get to know me. Thank you.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Public Policy Council and Overland Park Chamber and the viewers tuning in. Appreciate the time, appreciate the attention to our race, and hope you all get to know us a little bit better out of this. The year was 1989. My mother, having only moved to the United States a handful of years before, was faced with the daunting task of trying to raise a child on her own, working long hours in a small apartment just to make ends meet. As each year went by, my mother sacrificed every day to make sure that not only did we have food on the table, but we had what we needed to get by, because she decided to lead, as many mothers do. When I was making the decision on whether to run for office, I reflected on the lessons I learned while growing up. Talk is cheap, but in today's environment, plenty of people want to talk rather than lead. It's why I've taken the task of leadership in a different direction. I've worked for both Republican and Democratic governors, most recently 2.5 years for Governor Laura Kelly. In fact, when I left the governor's office to take a job with the private sector, I was told by Governor Kelly that I'd be welcome back anytime I want. And I appreciate that. It's why I've also worked to build relationships across the aisle that will allow me to bring a diverse coalition of leaders together anytime I need to. It's because I believe in bringing people together. I hate divisiveness. I'm the only person in this race that's truly committed to working together regardless of party. We need leadership that will spend every single day working with both parties to find the votes for solutions that our community cares about. I look forward to you getting to know me, but also getting to know why I'm the only bipartisan candidate in this race and the only candidate that will represent you, not any single party interest.
Thank you. So I just want to do a little housekeeping, because I forgot on the front end, on my end, just to say that after opening comments, we're going to go through questions. These questions are written by the Public Policy Council, and we will get through as many questions as time will allow. We will not be taking any questions from the audience at the end of our questions. Because this is a forum and not a debate, we will not have built-in time for rebuttal. And at the conclusion of our Q&A period, we will give each candidate, again, 1 minute for a closing statement. So we will start, since we drew numbers, and Heather, you drew your name, we drew your name first. We're going to start with question number 1. Oh, I'm sorry, we go to David, because we started with her for the opening statement. My apologies.
You're good.
As a candidate, David, what are your top 3 policy issues?
Thank you. Well, I think the number one most pressing issue, and I spent a lot of time of it working with the Kansas Department of Commerce and with the legislature, is out-migration. Currently, we have a lot of tremendous talent when it comes to our youth that unfortunately leaves the state of Kansas, whether it be after high school, going to college, or even after college, and then they don't come back. There's a recent study that was done that Kansas has top 10 worker output nationally, which means our workers are incredibly efficient, they're tremendously successful, they get things done. So we know the talent's here, but yet so many of them leave our state, and then they don't come back. So I think it's incredibly important for us to focus on making sure that our youth see their vision and their future here in Kansas and being able to reach them at a much younger age. I think it's incredibly important for us to make sure we look at our tax structure. So whether it be personal income tax, our business taxes, I think it's really important for us to make sure that we offset some of the rising costs we've had with inflation, or whether it be with respect to supply chain demands or other things. And I think it's important for us to have a very competitive tax policy, not only with our neighbors, but nationally. And then lastly, I also want to make sure that we address property taxes. The state shouldn't be subsidizing property taxes, as some proposals have suggested. I think it's incredibly important for us to make sure that government is doing as much as it can with the taxes it's receiving, and that despite difficult times, we should all make sure that we're doing the most with the dollars that are available to us. And so government should be no different. I think it's really important to limit the property tax increases many of our community members are seeing.
Thank you. Same question for you, Heather.
Sure. My top 3 priorities, I really keep expanding them because there are so many different concerns that I'm hearing at the door and via email and everything. But for me, the top 3 reasons why I really got into the race are to make sure that our community truly works for everyone, and that includes the economy, the healthcare system, and our public schools. As far as our public schools go, it is imperative that we continue to fully fund them. And that means we fully fund special education too. There were a few minutes on the floor this last session where there was a debate about whether or not we should fully fund special education. And it was very disheartening to hear from some of my colleagues that was just not important to them. And I know that through my experience in the public school system, that is one of our priorities. And I know from hearing from our district advocates, that's a priority too. As far as expanding Medicaid goes, I've been a medical social worker for years. And one of the biggest issues that they face, which I know we will talk a bit about in our next questions, but is really accessing critical care and making sure that hardworking Kansans, even if they are lower income, have access to health care that they need. Now, as far as creating an economy that works for everyone, I think that that truly means everyone. That means from the lowest paid worker all the way up. And I think that we really need to focus on meeting their needs in every different way that we possibly can as legislators and as a state. And I'd be happy to expand on that later as well.
Okay, moving on to question 2. So we will rotate again back with Heather. You will start with this question. What are your views on state tax policy? If you could be specific, that would be very much appreciated.
Sure. So I really believe that smart tax policy balances 3 things, and that's income, sales, and property tax. We have to be fiscally responsible, we have to be fair, and all tax policy has to be sustainable. We were fortunate enough to have a budget surplus this last year, and I really believe that we should be using that budget surplus to create more opportunities for our families, for our communities, for our business members, and to really grow our communities as a whole. I believe that in using this surplus, we can help our students, we can help our families with property tax reductions, such as the local ad valorem tax reduction that I'm happy to be on board with several of my fellow colleagues. I know that one can be a little misunderstood, but I think that that's something that we should really be focusing on to provide relief for our families across the board. that fund has gone unfunded since 2001 and is technically required to be funded at $45 million a year approximately. That's money that our municipalities are missing out on, and that's money that can be, sent down to our property taxpayers to help reduce that burden. So those are just a few of my priorities when it comes to state tax policy.
Right, same question for you, David.
Thank you. So I think it's important, Kansas has to lower the tax burden on all of our residents and businesses. It's important for us to make sure that every single tax bracket is able to receive some type of benefit when it comes to reforming our tax policy. We can't see record surpluses right now and not be able to get some of that tax dollar back to the taxpayer. So for instance, today it was announced that for the month of September, Kansas received $96 million more in tax revenue than estimated. That continues to add to the surplus that we already have. And I think it's incredibly important for us that as soon as the legislature comes back in January, when I'm elected, I'm going to push forward to make sure that the tax reform is on top of the list and make sure we get money back to the taxpayer to offset some of the rising costs we've had with inflation, the additional cost businesses have had to be able to operate, find workforce. Workforce is incredibly important. Supply chain issues, it currently costs more to get materials in. All of those things are so incredibly needed. And if we're going to be able to compete both with our neighbors and with everybody around us, I think it's really important for us to make sure that we look at this responsibly, we make sure we can afford the tax cuts we put in place. The bare minimum, of course, should be that we don't vote for a tax increase, and that's something I commit to you. But I think at the end of the day, we've got to be able to invest more in Kansas. We've got to be able to invest more in our families, our businesses, make sure that they can afford to do business here, stay here, grow old here. And then one other thing I think that's really important for us to address is Kansas is one of 11 states that taxes Social Security when you make over $75,000. I don't understand this. I don't understand why we continue to tax our retirees. I think it's incredibly important for Kansas to become more retiree friendly, and that's something I commit to voting for once elected.
Thank you. Question number 3, what are your views on K-12 education funding and accessibility? And we will start with you, David, on this one.
Thank you. I think let's get something quickly out of the way. Kansas must fully fund our schools, period. I don't understand why we have this debate every single year in the state legislature. This is something that should be bare minimum required, not debated, and that includes special education. I'm the husband of a special education teacher to Shawnee Mission. I've heard firsthand from administrators, from teachers, from parents, exactly what has gone on with respect to special education funding, and the fact that when we don't provide the proper special education funding to our schools, the fact that they have to then make up the difference, the fact that then that ends up hurting our schools, our teachers. We should be putting forward the fact our teachers' relationship with the students is the most important thing with respect to our educational system. It's why our education system is so great. It's why Kansas has always had great public schools. And with respect to public schools too, I think sometimes we forget the fact that, when we look at prospective employers, it's really important. They look at great public schools, and that's where they decide where to locate. So from our end, our community public schools are the backbone of what makes us so great. And I think it's really important for us to make sure that we continue to fully invest, fully fund them, make sure money is spent in the classroom to help the relationship our teachers have with their students, to help them grow and prosper and achieve their full potential. With respect to K-12, I will always fund schools, and that includes special education. And I think that has to be a top priority every single year, and it shouldn't come down to politics.
Thank you. Heather, same question for you.
I would definitely agree that this shouldn't come down to politics, because great schools are truly the bedrock of our economy and our communities. As I said previously, I've had children in K-12 schools since kindergarten. I myself am a product of Kansas K-12 schools and public colleges and universities. I have spent a lot of time listening to our teachers, our administrators, our superintendents, and everyone across the board, and they continue to be concerned that if we don't have fully funded public education, that we are going to lose opportunities for our teachers, our students, and our communities communities as a whole. I have voted to fully fund public education. I will continue to do so. I will never let it become something that goes to the back burner, and I will not allow other policy influencers to change my mind on this. It is important that we listen to the people on the ground, such as your wife, who does the hard work of teaching our children in our schools, and we need to keep that as our focus as we determine how we spend this funding. But regardless, our public schools should always be fully funded, and this should never be something that becomes a political game.
Thank you. We're going to move on to question 4 around economic development. What type of economic development policies do you support to encourage job growth and business expansion in Kansas? Heather, we'll start with you.
Sure. So I would support targeted incentives that would help spur job growth and business investment, including for small businesses, entrepreneurs, and minority-owned businesses specifically. I also think that it's very important that we take a look at green-collar jobs, especially since we have so many opportunities to do that here in the great state of Kansas. I think that we have great opportunities to invest in wind and solar power, which would create a lot of job opportunities across the state. I also believe that we have the opportunity to draw in more businesses by making the state desirable as a whole. Kansas is often the butt of many jokes, as we most recently heard all over Twitter about how we don't have a brand, and I think that we do have a brand. Kansans are nice, Kansans are compassionate, and Kansans deeply care about their communities. And we need to continue to show the world that that is exactly who we are by making sure that we protect our most vulnerable community members, including our LGBTQ population. And we also need to continue to fully fund our public schools, invest in infrastructure, and find ways to help our minority businesses and small business owners grow their businesses altogether. Another one that I would mention that there wasn't a lot of room to express on the survey, but I also fully support cannabis decriminalization, especially because states around us are reaping the economic benefits from this. And I think it is very important, especially with what's happening on Missouri's ballot this upcoming November, to explore that and make sure that we can also benefit from this as a way to increase our reserves and fully fund social services, infrastructure, substance use programs, public safety programs, and the like.
Thank you. David, same question for you. If you'd like me to repeat it, I'm happy to.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate it. I think it's incredibly important for us to ask our businesses what it is we can do to best help them. I think sometimes, when it comes to economic development, and sometimes as we talk about incentives and job growth and things along those lines, we often seem to focus on some of the bigger businesses, and we often forget small businesses. Small businesses are the bread and butter. They're the backbone of our economy. They mean the world to our local community. So many of us visit them, again, help support them. I think that's incredibly important. So from my end, what I want to see done is balance. But I think also it's really important for us to approach this on a bipartisan basis. When I was able to work at the Kansas Department of Commerce under the last 2 governors, they entrusted me to handle economic development policy, and with that we were able to get done some of the most meaningful economic development solutions in the last few decades. And because of that, as we've seen an incredible increase in capital investment. We've seen 4,000 plus jobs added. That doesn't necessarily even begin to include some of the temporary jobs with respect to construction and other investment that's being done in our local community. So I think it's really important for us to make sure that, as we begin to approach, how do we take that next step? How do we become that national brand, with respect to, obviously we saw Panasonic that's coming here and being able to, create thousands of jobs with respect to car batteries and being able to be, a leader in that regard nationally. I think we've got to look at how do we help all businesses, how do we look at workforce, as we'll touch on later, and how do we begin to connect the dots with respect to having our businesses truly feel the support of our state government and have policies that truly address their needs.
Thank you. Question number 5. What would you do to grow and develop the state's workforce? And we'll start with you, Tim.
Thank you. This is something that I've worked on very closely. So when Governor Kelly put together a team for the Kansas Framework for Growth, which was the economic development blueprint for the state, I was heavily involved. And one of the things we really looked at was we've got a lot of jobs here in our state. We have below average unemployment, meaning we've got way more jobs than we have people to fill them. In theory, that would be a good problem to have, except for the fact that that's going to potentially cause businesses to leave if they can't meet their workforce demand. So one of the things we really need to be able to look at, and I touched on earlier, is how do we connect youth with job opportunities at an earlier age? That means reaching them at high school, even beforehand, figuring out what their passion is, connecting them with that passion at an earlier age so they can see that opportunity, especially if, let's say, for instance, they don't necessarily want to go to a four-year school, work them through the various certificates and other potential opportunities that are available to them. They can make a great salary at 18 years old if they find the needs that, if they find their passion and they're able to connect with a company. That's something that can get them going immediately, and suddenly at 18 you're making a great wage. You're potentially raising a family in your 20s, and suddenly you see your vision here in Kansas in the long run. I also think it's really important for us to invest in programs like Build Up Kansas. So Build Up Kansas focuses on, again, another program we're reaching high school kids at a young age to be welders, construction, other opportunities that really will help them get going at a much earlier age and be able to get to the workforce, again, 18, 19 years old, making $70,000. And they're not aware of those opportunities. So we have to do a much better job at not only marketing that, but investing in programs that will allow businesses and students to take advantage of that.
Thank you, David. Same question for you, Heather.
Thank you. So David and I don't differ much on this one. I really do think that the work that Governor Kelly and the Department of Commerce and Lieutenant Governor David Tolan have done to encourage our students to remain in Kansas and encourage our businesses to provide opportunities for them has been absolutely amazing. Furthermore, I think that we should focus on developing the trades and really working with our partners in the trades to find ways to encourage our youth to pursue apprenticeships and other opportunities of that nature, starting in high school and moving forward. We know how expensive a college education is, and many of us struggle with student loan debt. I think that providing our students with the opportunities to explore these different trades and the ability to get paid apprenticeships in the process is something that we should really be focusing on, especially as the state continues to develop our infrastructure and as we continue to build more projects across the state as well. I do think that another part of this is that we must encourage our businesses to support employee-first programs such as comprehensive benefits, child care assistance, fair wages, equitable opportunities across the board, and really putting the focus on encouraging our workforce to stay within the state instead of crossing state lines for those great benefits, and making sure that they know, especially our youth, know that staying here in our state of Kansas would give them opportunities for limitless development.
Thank you. Moving on to question 6. What are your views on the state's role with respect to ensuring access and affordability of post-secondary education? And Heather, we will start with you.
Thank you. So as an adult college graduate, I definitely feel the strain of college loans, especially because I also have a 20-year-old child who will be either entering college or the trades soon. We should really begin by investing in programs and incentives that offset the overall cost of attending college, especially for working adults like myself, so that we can encourage our current workforce to continue to expand on their ability to grow within their jobs. I also think that it's important to offer more diverse educational opportunities besides just college by focusing on our trades and our community colleges as a way for folks to get involved in or explore careers that may pique their interest before just making that decision in high school and trying to stick with it through college with all of the student loan debt that can come along with it. And mentioning student loan debt, I think that it is also important that we explore using our budget surplus to see if there is a way that we can offset that debt for low-income students and middle-class families so that they can make sure that they have the opportunities and the equitable opportunities at that to make sure that they have the education that will help them grow in their careers and stay within our state and raise their families here and contribute to our communities as a whole.
Thank you. David, same question for you.
Thank you. I think it's really critical for our youth to have access to post-secondary education that can best prepare them for, the job market that faces them the second they're done with their education pursuits. Recently there was a study, or I should say, recently they looked at some of the numbers with respect to Kansas higher education. So our enrollment on four-year schools is actually down a little bit. I think it's important for us to start asking questions why that is, whether it is an affordability, whether we're just not offering some of the things that we should be. I think there is some good news. There was an increase in two-year schools and some of the trades, and so I think that's a great sign because that is very much what our market needs. But we also have to make sure that our four-year schools are indeed offering what it is our students want, because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure we keep our kids here in Kansas, and we want to make sure that they know they've got great state schools here, they've got great opportunities here. The better chance we've got at keeping them here, the better chance when it comes to post-secondary education, the better chance we've got at keeping them here in the long run, and that's going to be critical for our workforce needs. But I was also happy to be able to make sure that, at my time at the Department of Commerce, the governor tasked me with making sure that we renewed the engineering program for all of our public colleges and universities. And so with respect to that, I was happy to be able to get bipartisan support because I think that's incredibly important. Engineering is one of the top needs in our state, and it's a top needs nationally. So I think it's really important for us to look at, let's say, engineering or other important sectors and make sure that, when we look at what it is our universities are offering, make sure they're addressing the needs of the job market as well. So it's all got to tie in together, and that takes a lot of work. It takes bipartisan work, but I've done it in the past, and I know we can be able to do it, but that's got to be certainly one of our top priorities, along with K-12, is making sure post-secondary education remains on the legislature's radar each and every year.
Thank you. Question 7. What do you believe the takeaways for state lawmakers should be from the COVID-19 pandemic experience? Let's start with you, David.
Thank you. I think we all went through it. Currently, actually, still to some degree going through it. Very thankfully to have gone through the worst of it, and now we're on the other side. But when it comes to COVID-19, there's no playbook, right? There's no. It happened 100 years ago. None of us can turn back to kind of the 1920s and figure out what happened and what we did right, what we did wrong, and learn from it. So I think the best thing we could be able to do is just try to, create, some type of, historical log and try to figure out how we best implement policies going forward. So, whether it come to the fact that we were picking winners and losers as it pertains to jobs, I thought that was incredibly unfortunate to tell someone that they don't have an essential job. When it's, they're relying on that income to provide for their family, especially in an unstable situation. That's not something we should ever do. Every job is essential. Every person's livelihood is essential. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers when it comes to that. I also think as it pertains to some of the mask mandate rules, they were all over the place. If you look at it, one county had a complete mask mandate, one didn't. Those people that didn't were traveling into counties that had mask mandates. And then vice versa, and so that whole policy didn't make any sense. I think it's really important for us to learn from that. Make sure we look at the best possible outcomes for our entire state, our families, our businesses. Learn a little bit from the fact that it's important for us to make sure we keep everybody safe, but we don't necessarily have to just immediately rush and try to do things that don't make any sense. We have to be able to make sure we work together to fully address public health needs, and then also make sure that, again, we don't impact the livelihoods of others at the expense, of that policy.
Thank you. Same question for you, Heather.
Sure. So, as someone who worked in the medical field throughout the pandemic, I watched how this affected our families, our elderly, our community members, our businesses, all across the board. This was completely unprecedented, and it was very difficult for everyone. Those of us in the medical community had a very difficult time navigating this, and it was tough because we had to really stress the importance of public health and public safety while also trying to balance the needs of those we were serving who were losing their jobs and who were losing their ability to go to work. It was a very difficult decision, I think, for all communities to make, and they had no playbook to guide them. So I think that many of our communities did the right thing by following the advice and the expertise of the medical field. Medical professionals were asked to do what they could with the limited information they had at the time, and I think that trickled down to our communities who were also trying to do their best in a time of unprecedented and absolutely, unfortunate loss and concern for the health of everyone. I think that it's a really difficult thing to say now what we should have done at the time, more so than what we could do in the future. I think that in the future it's important for us to work with our medical professionals and really try to find a way to address this head on before it begins. But in the event that that cannot happen, I think that it's important for our local municipalities and communities and school districts to really try to put the needs of public health first while also emphasizing the needs of their families who are trying to work. And with that, I mean that we need to focus on local control and allow our different areas of the state, who are vastly different across the state, to make determinations about what works for their community.
Thank you. We're going to go on to question 8. What are your views on healthcare policy and Medicaid expansion? And Heather, we start with you.
Thank you. So as I mentioned before, I strongly believe that it's important to expand Medicaid. And I look at this from a few different perspectives. One, as a medical social worker, as previously mentioned, I specifically work with low-income individuals or individuals who are at high risk and folks who have a hard time accessing medical care and their prescription medications. Medicaid expansion is both good social policy and good economic policy, but on the social policy aspect, my clients, once Missouri enacted Medicaid expansion, started moving out of our state and moving across the state line so that they could access those benefits. These people were people who were working. These are people who were just lower income, and they deserve the same access to health care as anyone else who has health care provided to them through their employer. Now, on the other hand, personally, I have been someone who has been without health insurance in the past. I am a type 1 diabetic, and prior to the ACA, I was not allowed or afforded health coverage. So I know that struggle very deeply and very personally. And I know how difficult it can be to try to make ends meet while you're working really hard and not being able to afford medication. And this is a struggle that continues to happen across the state, and I don't believe that it's right. I believe that health care is a human right, and I believe that Medicaid expansion is one way that we can make sure that all of our community members and all of the people across the state are afforded access to the health care that they need. In addition, we are losing out on federal funding every year that we don't expand. And most of the states around us have expanded, and most of them are not seeing the issues of losing critical health care facilities in their rural communities. And we need to make sure that we expand Medicaid so that we can also ensure that those facilities are open and available for our constituents and the rural parts of our state.
Thank you. Same question for you, David.
Thank you. I think it's incredibly important to make sure we emphasize affordable health care. Affordable health care is critical to everyone in our community. It's critical to our families. It's critical, especially to our children. I know firsthand, one of the difficult things is, as far as growing up sometimes with a single mother, was, times were tough. And so I had taken advantage of Child Health Care Plus, which was again, a type of Medicare type offer as far as healthcare for kids. So we fully understand the difficulties that come involved with that. But I think it's also incredibly important to make sure that people are able to also get back on their feet, when they need it. And I think Medicare expansion is, again, I think we're open to it. I think what we want to be able to see is something similar to what we've done with unemployment, which is called the My Reemployment Plan. Not necessarily exactly the same, as far as implementing it for Medicaid expansion, but I think it's important for us to make sure we figure out what is, what's the reason someone is ultimately needing to rely on Medicaid expansion? I think workforce training is critically important. I want to make sure we're able to take care of that. The question, are there childcare needs? Sometimes folks want to be able to work and be able to get to that, great job that pays well, that's got tremendous health care. I think our companies want to invest in great health care options for people. But is daycare a challenge? If daycare is a challenge, we have to be able to make sure we work through that. So there's a lot of different barriers in place, but I want to make sure that, as we look at affordable healthcare solutions, such as Medicare expansion, I think it's Medicaid expansion, it's incredibly important for us to see, what is it that people, what is the barrier to people as far as being able to attain affordable healthcare? How can we best help them? How can we knock down their barriers so they can succeed and they can get the maximum amount out of out of their job potential, out of job growth that they can be, and I think that'll ultimately help set success and make affordable healthcare a reality.
Thank you. We'll move on to question 9. Control over decision making has been divided among the state legislature and local governments, including school boards, on issues such as taxation, economic development, and education. These have all been up for debate. What are your views on this issue? And we will start with you, David.
Thank you. So I think it's really important for us to first say that, as we look at Johnson County as a whole, one of the most challenging things when I worked up in Topeka and having worked with the Johnson County delegation is sometimes we're fractured on a partisan basis. So sometimes as we look at, we're divided as a state, but sometimes we're even divided as a group of people that ultimately should be all unified in wanting to make sure Johnson County gets the most out of Topeka as possible. So, while we may be of different parties, we may be of different backgrounds, there's no reason we can't become a singular voice for Johnson County and the needs, and whether it be our county, our cities, our school districts. I think it's incredibly important for us to be that single voice, unified, working together to make that happen. And I think what we need is more leadership, bipartisan leadership, to make sure that, we've got Democrats, we've got Republicans that represent Johnson County, but we all need to come together to represent the needs. If we don't, there are other counties and other regions of our state that'll get those valuable tax dollars and resources, and otherwise Johnson County loses out, and I think that's incredibly unfortunate when that happens. With respect to local government, I think local control is incredibly important. I think our local government should be able to have the ability to take advantage of whether it be economic development, whether it be boosting education, whether it be other needs. At the end of the day, one of the main focuses of government should always be making sure we don't take away access and power from our local governments. They deal with our residents firsthand on a day-to-day basis. They know what their needs are. We shouldn't be handcuffing them. We should be allowing them to have the opportunity to make sure that they can make the decisions they need that'll best represent our community, our residents, our families. And I think that's one critical piece of governing that shouldn't be forgotten.
Thank you. We will go on to question 10, which is our final question. Oh, I'm sorry, Heather. I was just going to stop you. I'm sorry. Let's go back to question 9, and Heather, we'll go with you.
Thanks. I can make it pretty short and sweet. So, I would agree with David on several of those issues. I think that, we really have to put the needs of our municipalities front and center when it comes to making decisions about this. We have to ask them to come to the table and talk to us about how we can best serve them, not how we can serve them, making up our own mind how that's going to be. Local control is invaluable. Johnson County is one of the biggest economic drivers in the entire state, and we need to make sure that we continue to respect that and respect our decision-making abilities, and really emphasize that each municipality in the state is unique, and we need to turn to them for guidance on how to develop our policies in the future.
Thank you. So now we will go to question 10, and Heather, we will start with you. What do you believe most distinguishes you from your opponent in this race?
Sure. So I have a breadth of experience working directly one-on-one with individuals living in our community. I have spent quite a bit of my time on the ground doing the real work of serving people at the community level. The reason why I went to Topeka was simply to serve them. I don't have any big political aspirations or anything like that. I just want to make sure that we have representation that really puts the voices of our community members front and center, and that is why I went to serve. I know that there's a lot being made of partisanship. I do not adhere to any particular partisan objective. I am very much my own individual person, and I will continue to be in Topeka. I would say that my colleagues would agree. I have not voted with our caucus 100% of the time because I think that putting the needs of our community is first. When I've received emails about certain policies and certain votes that we have coming up, regardless of what my party caucus has said, I have voted the wishes of my district, and that has happened on several occasions. Beyond that, I think that it's really important to note that I go in this with a heart of service, period. You know, this is a big sacrifice to serve our community, and I think that both of our families would agree to that. I'm just simply here to make sure that your voices are heard, that they continue to be brought to the table, and that I truly represent your values. Full stop.
Thank you. Same question for you, Dave.
Thank you. You know, the difference between us, quite frankly, is, you know, I've had a long track record of working with Democrats and Republicans on bipartisan policy, you know, that's brought positive results for, you know, our state. There's a reason why both, you know, last two governors both wanted to hire me. Were very excited for me to be part of their staff, and both very much I've remained in great relationship with going forward, because at the end of the day, you know, as we talk about these items, we talk about special education funding, for example, this is going to require bipartisan support. You've got to be able to take leadership as someone that this matters to you, to your community, and be able to work with individual legislators to find a coalition to get things done, regardless of whatever legislative leadership wants. I think it's incredibly, you know, when we look at, you know, again, whether it be education funding, special education funding. Special education funding, for example, came up, the vote happened, and then suddenly, immediately, arms got twisted and things changed. I think it's important to make sure we have leadership in place that can always work with Republicans and Democrats to make sure that that will always stay true. So work every single day to take the lead on special education funding, take the lead on school funding, take the lead on affordable health care. It's you know, sometimes it's easy enough to vote. It's really hard to take leadership and go against party will. That's something I've done repeatedly. And again, in both parties, I've got great relationships and they respect me, and I can always, you know, pick up that phone or come find them and be able to work with them on those key issues. And so for me, it's something I've done every day. I've done it for, you know, every year that I've been up in Topeka. It's something I've built a tremendous reputation on. There's a reason why I've got support from both parties and various people in both parties. And that's why, you know, to me, that's why I decided to run, is I think we need that bipartisan leadership to get things done, and I'm the only person in the race that can do that.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank the candidates for their time today and for coming to the forum and addressing these really important issues. We're now going to go to our closing comments, and just want to remind you, you each have 1 minute. And so, David, we're going to start with you to give your closing statement.
Great, thank you. In today's political environment, it's important we combat extremism with sensible leadership. Ask yourself, who's more likely to be able to lead on issues that matter most importantly to you? Who is a person who can bring together members from both sides of the aisle to deliver those results that matter most to our community? Who is the person that has dedicated their lives to doing all these things and doing so successfully while earning the respect and relationships with members on both sides of the aisle? Earlier this year in May, my opponent stated in an op-ed this year that she isn't a centrist, and she's proud of that. Do you think that will help bridge the divide? At a time when our political system is so fractured, we need leaders who will put partisanship aside and get things done. Fight back against inflation, lower our property taxes, keep schools funded, prioritizing teachers' relationships with their students, maintaining public safety, keeping our small businesses open, and growing our state economy. Only one person in this race has a track record and capability of doing that. I appreciate the time you've afforded me today, and I look forward to earning your vote in November.
Thank you. I want to again thank you for participating today. Oh, why do I keep doing this? Apologies, everyone. I just am like ready to go today. Heather, please take a minute. Hi, hi, good to see you. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. It's okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I truly appreciate it, and it's been an absolute honor to serve as your state representative this last session. I know that I'm still pretty new here, so I'm a little green around the edges, but you know, I continue to fight for your values and for the values of our community, regardless of partisanship. Well, yes, I did say that I am definitely far from a centrist. Those are my personal views, and I believe that transparency and ethics are important. I chose to run because as a social worker, I've spent years on the ground listening to the real life issues that our families and communities face. And I felt that it was important to bring your voices to the State House and make sure that our communities have representation that would put your values front and center. I also strongly believe that it is our job to make sure that every single person in our community, regardless of background or political affiliation, has the opportunity and the resources to lead happy, healthy, and successful lives. And that's why I feel it's so important for you to support my re-election to the Kansas House, because I will always put your priorities first, and I will always listen to you when making decisions about the direction of our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I would like to thank you for attending today and sharing your thoughts with us. We are also appreciative of both of you and your willingness to serve the Johnson County area. There will be a recording today of the forum that will be will be out on the website at www.votejoco.com. Advanced voting in person does begin Saturday, October the 22nd, and Election Day is Tuesday, November 8th. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you for our next forum.
Thank you.
Thank you.